What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. Today, we got a guest on that was a former cop, correctional officer, whatever you want to call him, right? He spent some time in Virginia around one of the dudes that I think is one of the most violent, dangerous dudes you could ever be around. And if there's youngsters listening, they should probably listen to this story. He spent a lot of time around a guy by the name of Robert Gleason. They call him Bobby Gleason. Bobby Gleason was a guy that ended up with 2 life sentences plus 13 years for committing a murder to cover up his gang affiliation, right? According to court documents. So anyway, he ends up going to prison and he kills a couple people in prison. But definitely a dangerous guy, crazy guy. And at the end, he leaves his blood on the razor wire because they execute him. But anyway, Nate, you can tell your story better than I can. Big Nate, tell the people who you are. Talk a little bit about you so they know who you are.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nate. I'm from Calcutta, India. I was born there and I was adopted when I was 6 months old. Raised mostly in Virginia. Spent a little time in Pittsburgh acquiring a college degree and then more time back in Virginia. But Bobby was...
Let me stop you. Hold on. Let me stop you for a minute.
Okay.
You end up becoming a correctional officer at the Riverside Jail, right? What makes you, you got a college degree. What makes you want to be a correctional officer, a cop? Do you think you're going to climb the ladder one day and be the boss? I mean, what was your incentive?
This was before I had the degree. Everyone in my family is prior law enforcement, military, worked for the government, something along those lines. So it was just kind of one of those following their footsteps type thing. And I was working a security job, and one of the guys that I worked with there, who was working there part-time, noticed that I had a good work ethic and was like, hey, why don't you try to come to work for us? And that's how I ended up there.
Were you a little bit worried about going to work at a jail? I mean, a kid that's, you're not involved in the criminal lifestyle, even though your family is cops, law enforcement, you're a young kid, you're walking into a county jail. Were you a little bit worried about it?
Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. The first thing that blew my mind when I walked into the jail, honestly, it wasn't the people, it was the smell. And the smell, it's indescribable unless you've actually been there. But it took me months to get used to that smell. And then I remember my training officers, they were all former military, and, they taught me very, very well. But one of the things that they told me not to do, which I didn't know at the time because I was brand new, they were like, don't ask people what they did because they might still be trying to beat their charges and stuff like that. And we could look it up in the computer system what they did, but they're like, most of the time you don't want to know what these guys have done, so that way you can just keep it all in even keel because you don't want those issues of knowing those certain things. So I
did an interview with this guy, Richard Starsky, the other day where, he took some things out on a guy that was in there for an offense that, violated, youngsters or whatever. So if you were to find out that a guy, and let's keep it 100, you find out that a guy's in there for them type of charges, how do you see that person? Do you look at him a little different? You're like, man, F this guy. How do you feel?
It made me want to throw up. It made me want to throw up. And I'm not gonna say this on a basis of one crime is worse than another, but some of them are. I feel like I dealt with the murderers and the robbers and the drug dealers better than I did with one of the sex offenders, because once you find out what that person has done, it's just kind of like you should die. You should die slowly and painfully, and not be around to cause that kind of pain and turmoil to anyone else.
So do you think officers would go out of their way to be nasty to these type of people, not give them certain things like toilet paper, things that they needed? I mean, do officers do that?
No. Yes and no. It depends on the specific officer, but generally, we couldn't deny them toilet paper. Like, if you come up with a roll when it's empty, we're going to give you more toilet paper because we want you to be able to use the restroom.
I use that as an example because there's been times where I've been in prison, man, in the hole, things like that, where I couldn't get toilet paper and had to use the bathroom. And, right. Sometimes, like you said, and, I don't want people putting up caps, talking about we're capping, because they've been doing that here and there. So anyway, I want people to understand that this is what it is. There are some officers that go out of their way to be nasty. So if you're thinking about doing some BS and you catch a charge like that, be prepared for, what they're going. And I'm not saying everyone's guilty. The courts usually determine that. But I mean, if you're calling up, you're on the phone texting people like doop, 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 and then you show up and it's the police, you're probably guilty. You know what I mean?
Right.
You didn't show up at the house because you wanted to meet their aunt. But anyway, so now you end up in this prison with Gleason, right? Let's talk a little bit about him. What type of dude was he?
He was cold and he was calculating. He was very analytical. But to the sworn staff and to the civilian staff, he was actually very polite, in my experience. But I don't know what he said to other people that wasn't around, and I can't comment on the things that he did after he left the jail that I worked at because, I wasn't there for that. But in my experience, he was intelligent, he was cold, he was calculating, but he was also kind of open. We used to talk about tattoos and guns and motorcycles and things like that because he told me about his affiliations and it interested me.
What were his affiliations, if you don't mind saying?
So he said he was a Hell's Angel gang member.
I think there's some stuff in the paperwork that says some stuff like that. So he probably wasn't capping or freestyling. They used to call it freestyling back in the day. So, you end up finding out, eventually, he moves on. He ends up, with a life sentence and all of that. Were you shocked when you found out that he had killed a couple people in prison?
Honestly, I wasn't. I kind of knew that Bobby had this just cold, calculating demeanor of. You ever feel like when you're in a spot somewhere and you just know that someone is watching your every move and they're just plotting and just watching you to see when they can make their strike, I guess. That was the impression that I got from Bobby.
Let me ask you this. Do they teach you that in the academy, that all the prisoners are going to try to manipulate you? Don't ever get personal with them. They teach you that stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, see, the funny thing about the academy, I got hired February 20th, and I didn't go to the academy until, I think it was 9 months later. So that was the way they did things at the time. I think they changed it up now. But they were hiring people, who would pass the background checks and qualifications and whatnot in the physical fitness. But they would find a certain time to send you to the academy when everyone else, deemed it was necessary. So for a certain amount of time, you had untrained staff in there. But no, there was a guy, I think the first 3 weeks I was there, he tried to bribe me with $70,000.
What was he trying to bribe you for? What did he want?
He wanted cocaine.
People are going to be like, man, you're capping for $70,000?
Yeah.
Or do you think he was just messing with you, man, talking shit because you were new? Because, hey, listen, I've done it before where we mess with new cops.
Right. I don't know. I knew that his commissary account was full every week. Whatever his, whatever the maximum amount was for the sheet that they would put in, it was full every week. But he was like, hey, I'll give you $70,000 if you bring me in a line of blow. And I'm like, dude, I don't know where to get a line of blow. And I'm like, number two, I like being able to go home and play video games and do what I want to do. And I was like, I don't make illegal money, bro. That's not the move. But,
so he was he was messing with you, bro. He was capping. But anyway, that was nonsense. That's probably a bunch of bull. So after that, right, let's talk about county jails, because county jails can be violent. They can be vicious. And some young cats probably watching this, right? And some dudes will probably think, you know what, man? I don't want to go to prison. I'd rather be in the county jail. But I'm going to tell you that I'd rather be in prison than the county jail because the living conditions are better. Depending on where you go, the violence is, a little higher in prison. But
right.
County jails can be, at least in my county, Monroe County, Rochester, New York, dangerous place, bro. They'll beat the brakes off you. Did you ever witness people getting beat up in that county jail?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. The housing unit that I was in, I can't remember if I said this already or not, but it was a medium to maximum security housing unit. So there were fights happening all the time. And you'd have one fight pop off in one pod, you'd call the code, people would come down and respond, and 5 minutes later there'd be one in another pod.
You ever see someone really just get hammered in there?
Yeah, there was a kid, and I guess he watched too many Hollywood movies where, he came in and thought he had to take out the biggest, baddest guy, and we're standing there, we're passing out trays, and when the inmates would come up and get their trays, it would say names and cell numbers one at a time. And this big guy, he was some kind of a blood gang member. He was 6'7", a good 300 pounds, just solid muscle. And this kid comes up and knocks the tray out of his hands. And I was just like, oh shit, this isn't going to be good. So I'm like, hey man, I'll get you another tray. Just trying to keep things calm and civil. So he's like, all right. So we go to get in the other tray, and this kid just goes, knocks the tray out of his hands again. So at this point, I'm getting ready to call the code. And this guy just picks him up and body slams him. And when he body slams him, I thought he broke him because the kid just laid there.
You ever had to go into a situation where you were nervous? You were scared?
Yeah. Without a doubt. I turned 21 in the academy, so I got hired at 20 years old. And it was a completely different environment. Sometimes I remember one guy, I was patting him down, and I didn't have him off balance enough. And this was actually the last day I wore my glasses when I worked in corrections, because he came off the wall and hit me in the head with an elbow and knocked me sideways. So that was the last time I wore my glasses.
I know, working in a county jail environment, working in that jail, I mean, you're around all kinds of people, killers, SOs, robbers. I mean, you don't know who you're dealing with every day because you get everybody all in one bunch, right?
Right. And Michael Vick was there when I was there. He was locked in housing unit 1, I think it was 1 Charlie, which was PC. But they cleared out that entire wing, and he was locked in there for a little while. I think it was for his dogfighting charges.
What was it like to have Mike Vick there? Were other cops like, oh boy, Michael Vick's here, I want to see him?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I never went to see him because I'm not a sports guy, and then number 2, I didn't care. Like, whatever he did was whatever he did. But
you remind me of a sports guy, man. You're not.
No, not at all. I like the Pittsburgh Penguins. When I went up to culinary school in Pittsburgh, I became a Penguins fan, but I'm not a sports guy.
It's all good. So let me ask you about Gleason, right? You ever have any issues with him? I mean, you guarded him a lot, right?
So there was one morning, and I had to wake up at 4:45 in the morning. Roll call was it was either at 6 o'clock or 6:15, but either way, we had to get down to the pods to open up for breakfast at 7 o'clock. So I'm driving down this giant thing of trays because they didn't have a chow hall. So I'm dragging down this giant cart of trays, and I've got my 2 Dr. Peppers, and I've got my Reese's Cups. That was my breakfast in the morning. And as soon as
I got to stop you, bro. Hold on, I got to stop you.
Okay.
2 diet sodas and some Reese's Cups?
No. 2 Dr. Peppers and a Reese's Cup.
I was about to say, you can't have no diet soda, man, with Reese's Cup.
No, 2 Dr. Peppers, bro. So I'm dragging this in there, and I'd gotten the door open, and Bobby's in there screaming. And he wasn't screaming in pain or anything like that because he was single cell status because he was on the top tier. But he was yelling at the kid next to him, and he was saying he was going to kill him. And I look at my watch, and I'm like, okay, it's barely 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm not awake for this. So I walk up to his cell, and I knock on the door, and I'm like, hey, Bobby, I'm not awake, bro. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I haven't had my caffeine. What's going on? And he's on the ground, sharpening a shank. And he goes, I'm going to kill that fat black kid in the cell next door. And I was like, why? It's early in the morning. Can we not do this? And apparently the kid had stolen his canteen. And I know, once you get to prison, that's a major thing that you can get killed for that. But I was like, Bobby, that's not something that you would normally kill him for. So what's really going on? And he was a tattoo artist. And he showed me a painting or a mural or some type of picture that he had drawn that was dedicated to his Hells Angels chapter. And the kid had come through and marked through it. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, he marked through it. He did something to it to make it to the point where it disrespected him. So I walked back down to the top tier, and I said, gentlemen, unfortunately, breakfast is going to be delayed because we have to handle this. And they're like, oh, fuck you. We want our food. Let them just kill him, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is serious. So called my sergeant. They came in. They talked to Gleason. And they talked to the kid next to him, and the kid next to him thought that Bobby was capping. He thought that Bobby wasn't a real verified member of a security threat group. He almost lost his life over that.
Did you guys end up moving that kid out of that unit? I would imagine they did, right?
No, we actually took Bobby out. We took Bobby out and we placed him in administrative seg and put that kid in a classification as an enemy so those two could never be housed together in the same housing unit again. And then not too much longer, he got shipped out to DOC.
So he's in there sharpening up a shank. What are you thinking in your mind? Are you like, I got to write this dude up. He's sharpening a shank.
I was thinking, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm not awake. And what the fuck? Because is this real? Like, what? Because, dude, I was 19, 20 years old at the time. It blew my mind.
You know, totally blew my mind. Being a young kid working in a county jail, I mean, were the other prisoners disrespectful? Did they take advantage of you, talk shit to you, act like you were just a kid?
People talk shit all the time, but once you got to the point to where they knew that you were going to be the same way every single day, it was like, all right, he's going to do this, he's going to do this, he's going to do this, he's going to do this. So they knew that my routine was, I expect you to, follow the rules and don't start no shit, won't be no shit. But certain little things, you got to let slide. And there was a guy, he was in 5 Alpha, and 5 Alpha was in the same housing unit, it was still medium and maximum security, but a different pod than Gleason. And he wasn't getting money on his books. He was I don't remember what security threat group he was in, but he was some kind of a gang member, and he wasn't getting money on his books. And he came out one day, and he had a stack of pancakes, and the stack of pancakes was yay high. And I was like, bro, policy says I have to throw that away because you're hoarding food. And I was like, but I know you're hungry. I was like, you cover the shit up. I don't see it. I was like, I know it's hard in here for people who don't get money on the books. Yeah. So, I mean, certain little things like that, you got to let it slide because people are hungry, man.
You ever do a cell? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
With a certain amount of time.
You ever do a cell search and find anything serious?
Yeah. One time I found a shank made out of toilet paper and toothpaste.
Toilet paper and toothpaste. Yeah. Tell the people how they do that.
So they would take the toilet paper, take the toothpaste, and mix it together. They kept mixing it until it was kind of like the consistency of like a hard glue. And basically they just let it harden and take it and sharpen it. And then if they wanted to be really, really nasty, they could put feces or urine on the end of it, stab somebody with it. That'll cause them to develop sepsis.
Let me ask you this. While you worked there, I mean, you were a young kid. I'm sure you've seen some kids your age coming in there with serious charges, right?
Yeah.
You ever feel bad for them? Like, wow, man, I had this different family. I was adopted. But you know what? I could have been going down the wrong road if, my situation was different.
Yeah, there was a guy, and his last name was Jones. And Jones was maybe 18, 19 years old. And I was just walking around, just chatting with people, seeing how the day was, this and that. And he came up to me and he was like, Townsley, I don't get it. And I was like, what's up? And he's like, you're just walking around here like you don't have a care in the world. And I was like, no, man, I'm walking around because I'm just talking to people because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to interact with people and make sure things are okay. And I'm like, what's up? And he was like, I got my time yesterday. And I was like, oh. And I was like, how much time did you get? And he was like, man, I'm going to be dead before I get out. And I was like, how much time did you get? And the kid got like 70 years. I forgot what he did, but.
It's crazy, man. A lot of kids end up in bad positions, man. And people are like, oh, well, you can't say they're a product of their environment. I had a bad life. Well, most kids didn't because if your mother's using drugs and there's no food in the house, you got to rob and steal to eat. I mean, life is tough, right?
Right.
But, let's talk about this because I brought some other comments. This is the reason why I want people to know, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is because spending all the time that I spent in prison, almost 18 years of my life, I've seen cops do a lot of dirty shit to people. Just go search your locker, throw shit everywhere. I've seen them handcuff people, beat the shit out of people. And you're just, I've seen a lot of corruption in there over, nearly 20 years. And now recently we just had these 5 cops in, I think, Tennessee beat this kid and kill him, beat him to death. I don't think he was 28 or 29. So maybe he wasn't a kid, but he did look like a little fella.
Right.
During your time, right? And I bring guys on the show that are former cops, former law enforcement, and they always beat around the bush, most of them. Well, not really, but. So I'm going to ask you, you ever witnessed the cops? And they do this shit in county jails pretty consistently. Central booking, whatever. You ever seen the cops just beat the shit out of people?
Not just beat the shit out of people, but I've seen people take it too far. Like once you're in cuffs, there's no reason to hit an individual because they're already, they're locked up for their safety. So there's no point in trying to do pressure point takedowns or, any type of thing like that because they just need to be escorted to wherever because they're in cuffs. But word the paperwork right, man, there's a lot of things that get unreported.
Well, that's what I mean. I had a lieutenant one time say something about, he said, never let the truth get in the way of a good incident report. And, when he said that to me, man, it just made me think, man, this dude's a real piece of shit. You know what I mean? So, like you said, the cops do forge the paperwork. I mean, we see it all the time. It's in the news. It's in prisoners' legal news. It's in the criminal legal news. And, sometimes they get caught, but a lot of times they don't. That isn't to say that, hey, man, law enforcement, we should smash them and do this and do that. I mean, you have a job to do. And sometimes people do take it outside the scope of their job and beat people down. You ever want to intervene and say, hey, guys, that's enough?
No, because I never personally saw it. I heard about it, but I never personally saw it. So,
if you did personally see it, would you want to intervene or would you say, man, I better not because, they got that blue wall of silence?
Well, everything's on camera. So it's one of those, the video evidence would come out in court stating otherwise. So if you lied on camera, if it got escalated, then you're looking at jail time yourself.
Well, let me ask you this, though. There are some blind spots in jails, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Inside the cells, inside the showers, cells, showers, certain areas of the day room. Yeah, there's blind spots. There's blind spots everywhere.
So you worked the job for a couple of years. You end up getting out of there. Did you miss it?
No. It was a stressful environment, and I think that part of the reason that I had the migraine headaches, I mean, I still have migraine headaches now. I called out of work the other day for a migraine headache, but I think part of it at the time, it was not only migraine headaches, but stress headaches, just because of the amount of just negativity in that environment.
Tell me
that I would want to go back to. I run into former coworkers of mine every now and then. They're like, hey, you want to come back? And I'm like, well, number one, I'm making more money. And I was like, number two, you couldn't pay me enough to go back. I was like, y'all got rid of the TAC team. Y'all got rid of this. And I hear all kinds of things all the time. And it's like, I'm good. I'm good.
Let me ask you this. What makes it a stressful environment? Is it the people yelling? Is it the people banging on tables? Is it the people? Because look, man, that used to drive me nuts. Some dudes get on them tables, start banging and rapping and singing. It's all right for a little while, but man, when they're doing it for 3-4 hours straight, you're like, are you serious right now? What was it that's caused you the most stress working in that environment?
I think, well, one of my biggest issues, I ran into a guy that I'd gotten in a fight with. And inmates aren't supposed to touch officers. And this guy, he wasn't mentally there. He was about 5'6", maybe 130 pounds. But he had that crackhead strength. Like, he was out there. And I'm doing med pass with the nurse, and that's when you check their mouths to make sure they're not cheating the medication and, taking it off and selling it. And he comes up and he grabs my hand. I'm like, bro, don't do that. And I knew he wasn't mentally there, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He grabs my hand again. So at this point, I tell the nurse, and I'm like, hey, look, if he grabs my hand again, I'm going to shut the door, go on ahead and call 1033 because we're going to get to fighting. So he grabs my hand again, and I kick him in the chest. And he goes back. My sergeant comes in. Sergeant takes him down, and he gets escorted to the hold. Then about 6 months later, I was driving down Jeff Davis in Richmond, headed to Richmond, and I stopped at a 7-Eleven because I wanted a drink. And I had one of my 45s in the middle of my back, and I had a Gatorade in this hand and a Yoo-Hoo in the other. And I hear this guy yell my last name. And I was like, huh, I know this guy. And he comes up, holds up a stack of cash this thick. And I was like, what are you dealing again? He's like, yeah. I'm like, I'll see you in a few days. And at this point, he flips out a knife. And he's like, you want in on this? And I'm like, nah, bro, I'm good. I'm not dirty. Like, that's all you. But he ended up getting caught and going back to jail. And I saw him later that night. But it was a weird situation. Because I ran into other former inmates all the time, and normally they'll just come up and be like, hey, you know, I'm doing this with my life, or I'm doing that with my life. That's generally what it is. It's one of those, hey, I'm doing this, I've improved my life, and, you know, they just want to let you know that things are better. But that dude.
Were you ever worried around Gleason? You ever think, man, this dude right here is a crazy dude. I don't really want to be around him. I don't want to really be working his unit where he's at?
I wasn't worried about Gleason, but I had a very, very, very healthy respect for him that if he wanted to slit my throat, he could at any given time. So it wasn't really a fear, but it was just, hey, Bobby, how you doing? But at the same time, it's like, this guy can cut my throat.
Were other officers there scared of him, you think?
No. I think some people they didn't know what they were dealing with. And some people, they just chalked it off to, he's another person who's just going to be shipped off. But once he got shipped off and he committed, you know, there's 2 murders in both of those prisons, I reached out to some of my old buddies when I still had Facebook. And I was like, yo, did y'all see this? And they're like, yeah. So it's crazy.
Around some dangerous people. But anyway, man, I appreciate you coming on. Before we go, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the purposes, like, you know, Chad said with this channel, is to reach young people and, you know, people who we don't want y'all to go through those situations. And a buddy of mine, he'd gotten arrested for a simple possession charge of marijuana. And he called me, and he was like, hey, bro, are you off? And this was during the time when I was working in corrections. And I was like, yeah, bro, I'm off this week. I'll swing through. So I went out to his house. He rolled us a couple cigarettes and made us a couple drinks, and we just sat on the back porch. And I was like, what's up, bro? And we're sitting there, and we're just looking at the sky. And he goes, I've never appreciated the sky until now. I don't know how you do it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, dude, the little things that I took for granted, I'm just now starting to appreciate them.
So that's kind of like a little message today, man. Don't take the sky for granted. Don't take freedom for granted. You could end up in a county jail and you don't even know who you're next to. You could be next to a guy like Gleason. You could be in a cell with a guy like Gleason where everyone thinks, oh, he's just a long-haired white dude. He ain't shit. And really, man, he's a stone-cold psychopath, right?
Without a doubt.
So look, man, Nate, I definitely appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you tuning in. I know, you know, you're part of the Blood on the Razor Wire family. You reached out to me, talk to you, and I thought, you know, do a little interview and talk about old Gleason and definitely give a message. So I appreciate you. I'm going to tell people if they like the video, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share the video. With respect, Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Until tomorrow, we're out.